The letter arrived at dawn, much like the war had unexpected and carrying the weight of irrevocable change. Samuel Steele stared at the crumpled paper in his weathered hands, the morning sun filtering through the dusty window of his cabin as the memories of gunfire and fallen comrades echoed in his mind. It had been 4 years since the Confederate surrender at Appomattox, yet Samuel still fought battles every night in his dreams. Superior, Arizona Territory, 1869. The town had grown considerably since Samuel first settled here before the war, drawn by whispers of silver and the promise of open skies far from his Tennessee home. Now, at 32, he'd become a ghost among the living, going through the motions of existence without truly being present. Steele, the booming voice of Amos Jenkins, Superior's blacksmith, jolted Samuel from his thoughts. You planning to waste the whole day staring at that paper, or are you coming to help with the herd like you promised? Samuel folded the letter, a notice that the government had finally processed his veteran's pension, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. I'm coming, he replied, his voice rough from disuse. The cattle drive would take them north toward Phoenix, a welcome distraction from the emptiness that had become his constant companion. 4 years of bloodshed had taken more than just his youth. It had taken his ability to feel anything beyond the dull throb of survival. Heard Judge Wilson's daughter is arriving on today's stage, Amos continued as they walked toward the livery. Coming from back east somewhere. Boston, I think. Samuel merely nodded, uninterested in town gossip. What did it matter who came or went? The war had taught him the futility of attachments. Everyone either left or died eventually. The morning passed in a blur of dust and cattle, Samuel working mechanically alongside the other men. His reputation as Superior's most skilled horseman remained intact, despite everything else he'd lost in the war. He could still break the wildest Mustang, still track better than any man for 100 miles. These abilities had kept him employed and solitary exactly how he preferred things. By midday, when they paused to water the cattle at Arnett Creek, Samuel caught sight of the approaching stagecoach in the distance, trailing dust across the desert landscape. Something about its arrival tightened his chest, a premonition he couldn't name but felt bone deep. That'll be the judge's daughter, Amos said, following his gaze. Whole town's been talking about it for weeks. Apparently she's some kind of nurse or healer. Worked in army hospitals during the war. Samuel looked away, focusing instead on adjusting his saddle. The war had taken his brother, his best friend, and countless others. He'd seen too many men die in field hospitals to have any faith in healers or medicine. The cattle drive continued through the afternoon, and it was nearly sundown when they returned to town. Superior's main street was unusually busy. Townspeople gathered around the stagecoach stop outside the Grand Hotel. Samuel would have ridden straight to his cabin on the outskirts of town, but Amos called him back. Judge Wilson wants to thank us for helping with the herd. Says there's dinner waiting at his place. Free meal, Steele. Don't be a fool. Reluctantly, Samuel followed. The judge had been kind to him since his return from the war, offering him work when others had been wary of the hollow-eyed veteran who barely spoke. He owed the man at least the courtesy of accepting his hospitality. Judge Wilson's home was the grandest in Superior, a 2-story structure with actual glass windows and a wraparound porch. As they approached, Samuel noticed a woman standing on the porch, her back to them as she gazed toward the distant mountains. Her hair, the color of burnished copper in the setting sun, was partially pinned up, with loose tendrils dancing in the evening breeze. Ah, gentlemen. Judge Wilson emerged from the house, his round face beaming. Come meet my daughter, Willow. Come say hello to the men who have been helping with our cattle. The woman turned, and Samuel felt the world shift beneath his feet. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional way. Her face was too angular, her presence too commanding for traditional beauty. But her eyes, a startling shade of amber green, held an intelligence and directness that struck him like a physical blow. "Willow Donovan," she said, extending her hand first to Amos and then to Samuel. "Though I suppose it's Willow Wilson here. My father insisted I use his name while visiting." When her fingers touched his, Samuel felt a jolt, as if lightning had struck the very spot where their skin met. He withdrew his hand quickly, nodding mutely in greeting. "Samuel here doesn't talk much," Judge Wilson explained, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Best horseman in the territory, though. Fought for the Union, too. Came back different like many did." "I understand," Willow said softly, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "I saw many brave men return changed from the front lines." There was no pity in her gaze, only a clear-eyed acknowledgement that somehow unsettled him more than sympathy would have. Samuel looked away, focusing on the horizon where the sun cast its dying rays across the rugged landscape. "Come inside, everyone," the judge urged. "Cook has outdone herself tonight." The dining room was warm and well lit, a stark contrast to Samuel's sparse cabin. He sat stiffly, acutely aware of his dusty clothes and unkempt appearance among the judge's fine furnishings. Throughout the meal, he felt Willow's occasional glance, though she mainly engaged Amos and the other ranch hands in conversation. "Miss Donovan worked at Armory Square Hospital in Washington," Judge Wilson announced proudly. "Tended to Union soldiers throughout the worst of it. I was fortunate to study under Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell before the war," Willow explained. "When the fighting began, she encouraged those of us with training to offer our services." "A lady doctor?" one of the ranch hands asked, clearly skeptical. "A nurse," Willow corrected firmly, "though I've had to do a doctor's work when circumstances required it. Out here, I imagine such skills might prove useful." "Superior's got Doc Jeffries," Amos said. "Though he's getting on in years and his hands shake something fierce when he's sober, which ain't often." "Then perhaps I'll be of some use after all," she replied with a slight smile. "I plan to stay through winter at least. Father's been asking me to visit for years." Samuel remained silent throughout the meal, responding only when directly addressed, and then with as few words as possible. Yet he couldn't help noticing things about Willow Donovan: the confident way she held herself, the calluses on her hands that spoke of actual work, the shadows in her eyes that hinted at things seen and endured. As the dinner concluded, Judge Wilson invited the men to enjoy cigars on the porch. Samuel declined, claiming the need to check on his horse. It wasn't entirely a lie. He did need to escape the confines of the house, the weight of social expectations he could no longer meet. In the stable behind the judge's house, he found solace in the familiar smell of hay and horses. His mare, a spirited bay he'd named Liberty after the war, nickered softly at his approach. "You're not much for socializing either, are you, girl?" he murmured, stroking her neck. "She's beautiful," a voice said behind him, and Samuel turned to find Willow standing in the stable doorway, a shawl pulled around her shoulders against the evening chill. Samuel nodded, continuing to brush Liberty's coat. "Best horse I've ever had." "My father says you don't speak much," she observed, stepping further into the stable. "Yet you just spoke to your horse." "Liberty doesn't expect conversation in return," he replied after a moment. Willow approached slowly, respecting the space between them. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the mare. Samuel nodded, and Willow extended her hand, allowing Liberty to catch her scent before gently stroking the horse's muzzle. "I used to ride every day back in Massachusetts," she said. "Haven't had the chance since arriving. "The territory's different from back east," Samuel found himself saying. "Rougher terrain, different dangers." Willow glanced at him, a hint of challenge in her expression. "I've navigated dangerous terrain before, Mr. Steele. Different kinds, perhaps, but dangerous nonetheless." Their eyes met in the dimness of the stable, and Samuel felt that strange jolt again, a flicker of something he'd thought long dead. He looked away first. "Your father will be wondering where you are," he said gruffly. "I told him I needed air," she replied. "The truth is, I wanted to speak with you." Samuel tensed. "Why?" "Because you're the only person I've met today who doesn't look at me with curiosity or speculation," she said simply. "You look at me as if you're trying not to see me at all." The directness of her observation struck him silent. After several moments, he finally responded, "I'm not good company, Miss Donovan." "Wilson," she corrected with a small smile. "And I wasn't asking for company, merely making an observation." She turned to leave, then paused. "I'll be setting up a small clinic next to my father's office. If you ever need medical attention, Mr. Steele, I hope you won't hesitate to come." "I don't get sick," he stated flatly. "Everyone gets sick or injured eventually," she replied, "even those who have survived a war." With that, she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of lavender in her wake. Samuel stood motionless, his hand still on Liberty's neck. Something about Willow Donovan disturbed the careful numbness he'd cultivated since returning from the war. It wasn't just her beauty or her directness, it was the way she looked at him, as if she could see past the walls he'd built around himself. That night, for the first time in years, Samuel dreamed not of battlefields but of amber-green eyes and copper hair catching fire in the setting sun. The following days brought an unusual bustle to Superior. Willow Wilson, as she was known around town, quickly established her small clinic and began seeing patients. Word spread rapidly of her skill and compassion, drawing people from outlying homesteads and even the nearby mining camps. Samuel did his best to avoid her, taking on work that kept him away from town as much as possible. He guided a surveying party into the mountains, tracked down strays from the judge's herd, and spent 3 days hunting a mountain lion that had been preying on local livestock. But Superior was too small a town to avoid anyone indefinitely. 10 days after Willow's arrival, Samuel was thrown from his horse while rounding up cattle in a narrow canyon. He managed to ride back to town despite the searing pain in his shoulder, intending to have a whiskey at the saloon and deal with the injury himself, as he'd done countless times before. Fate had other plans. As he dismounted outside the saloon, the world tilted alarmingly, and he found himself on his knees in the dirt, his vision swimming. "Mr. Steele," the voice seemed to come from far away. Then hands were on him, surprisingly strong, helping him to his feet. "You're injured. Let me help you to the clinic." Samuel tried to protest, but the pain had become a roaring in his ears. He was vaguely aware of being half-carried, half-dragged down the street, of concerned voices and the smell of antiseptic, and then Willow's face swam into focus above him. "Your shoulder is dislocated," she said calmly, her hands already examining the injury with professional efficiency. "I need to set it. It will hurt, but only for a moment." Before he could respond, she positioned herself and with one swift movement popped his shoulder back into its socket. The pain was blinding, then suddenly reduced to a dull throb. Samuel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "There," Willow said, reaching for a bandage. "Now we need to immobilize it to allow healing. You've also got a nasty cut on your temple. It'll need stitches." Samuel remained silent as she worked, her touch clinical yet somehow gentle as she cleaned the wound on his head and began to stitch it closed. "I can see from your scars this isn't your first injury," she commented, her focus on her work. "Shrapnel wounds on your back. Bullet graze here. Her finger lightly traced a line along his upper arm. You were fortunate. Not everyone was, he replied, the words escaping before he could stop them. Willow's hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their work. No, she agreed softly. Not everyone was. There was something in her voice that made him really look at her for the first time since they'd met. Behind the professional composure, he glimpsed a shadow of the same haunting he carried within himself. You lost someone, he said, a statement rather than a question. Her hands continued their methodical work as she replied, my fiancé. He was a doctor with the 20th Massachusetts. Antietam. Samuel closed his eyes briefly. Antietam. The single bloodiest day of the war, over 3,000 men dead in just 12 hours of fighting. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. As am I for whoever you lost, she replied, finishing the last stitch and cutting the thread. When she began wrapping his shoulder, her fingers brushed against his bare skin, and again he felt that strange jolt, like a current passing between them. From her slight intake of breath, he knew she'd felt it too. You should rest for at least a week, she said, her professional demeanor returning as she stepped back. No riding, no heavy lifting. The stitches can come out in 10 days. Samuel nodded, already knowing he wouldn't follow her instructions completely. There was work to be done, and he'd functioned through worse pain. Thank you, he said, reaching for his shirt. You're welcome, Mr. Steele. She hesitated, then added, I've noticed you prefer your own company, but if you ever want to talk about what you saw in the war. Well, I've heard more stories than most. Nothing you say would shock me. Samuel paused in buttoning his shirt. Why would you want to hear more darkness? Don't you carry enough already? The question seemed to surprise her. Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter, she said after a moment. For both parties. He finished dressing in silence, contemplating her words. As he reached for his hat, he found himself asking, Why did you come to Superior? Surely there was more need for your skills back east. Willow's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. After the war, I needed space, distance. My father's letters painted this place as somewhere new beginnings were possible. She gave a small, self-deprecating smile. Perhaps I was naive to believe that. No, Samuel said, surprising himself again. This land has a way of clearing things, given time. Their eyes met, an understanding passing between them that needed no words. For the briefest moment, Samuel felt the wall he'd built around himself crack, just slightly. Good day, Miss Wilson, he said, settling his hat on his head. Good day, Mr. Steele. Remember, no riding for a week. He didn't promise anything as he left the clinic, but the ghost of a smile tugged at his lips for the first time in years. The following days brought an unseasonable rainstorm to Superior, turning the dusty streets to mud and confining many townsfolk to their homes. Samuel, restless in his small cabin despite his injured shoulder, found himself walking to town on the third day of rain, drawn by some unnamed impulse. He told himself he needed supplies, but when he found himself outside Willow's clinic instead of the general store, he could no longer deny the truth. Something about the judge's daughter had awakened a part of him he'd thought dead, a part that craved human connection. The clinic was quiet, no patients seeking treatment in the downpour. Samuel hesitated at the door, then knocked before he could change his mind. Willow answered, surprise evident in her expression. Mr. Steele, is your shoulder troubling you? No, he admitted. He faltered, suddenly unsure of his purpose. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Would you like to come in? I was just making coffee. The clinic was warm and surprisingly homey, with a small stove in the corner and shelves of neatly labeled medicines and supplies. A curtain separated the treatment area from what appeared to be Willow's living quarters, simple but comfortable, with books stacked on every surface. "You read a lot," Samuel observed as she poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Books were my companions growing up," she replied, handing him a cup. "My mother died when I was young. My father, though loving, was often occupied with his legal practice. I found friends in stories." Samuel accepted the coffee, its warmth seeping into his hands. Outside, rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound that somehow made it easier to speak. "My brother used to read to me," he found himself saying. "James. He was the educated one, went to college in Pennsylvania before the war." Willow sat across from him, her eyes attentive but not pushing. "Was he?" "Gettysburg," Samuel said, the word still a knife after all these years. "He joined a Pennsylvania regiment. I was with the 1st Tennessee then. Different sides of the same battle." Willow's intake of breath was sharp. "You fought for different sides," Samuel nodded, looking down into his coffee. "Our family was divided like many. Father believed in the Union, but our land was in Tennessee. James followed Father's politics. I stayed to protect our mother and the farm. Did you know?" "During the battle that he was there?" "Not until after," Samuel said softly. "I found his name on the casualty lists 2 weeks later. By then, his body was already in a mass grave. I never even got to say goodbye." The admission hung in the air between them. Samuel hadn't spoken of James to anyone since the war. The words felt foreign on his tongue, yet somehow right to share with her. "After my fiancé died," Willow said after a moment, "I threw myself into nursing, working 18-hour days, taking the worst cases, the most hopeless ones. I thought if I could save enough men, somehow it would balance the scales." She smiled sadly. "It doesn't work that way, of course." "No," Samuel agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the rain providing a soothing backdrop to thoughts too heavy for words. "I brought something for your shoulder," Willow said eventually, rising to fetch a small jar from her supplies. "An ointment with arnica and willow bark. It helps with the pain and swelling." She handed it to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. This time, Samuel didn't pull away from the contact. Instead, he found himself asking, "How did you become a nurse? It's not a common path for women, especially one from your background." Willow's expression brightened at the question. For the next hour, she told him about studying with Elizabeth Blackwell, about the challenges of being a woman in medicine, about her dreams of someday having her own practice. Samuel found himself listening intently, drawn to her passion and determination. In turn, he shared stories of his life before the war, growing up on a small farm in eastern Tennessee. His skill with horses, his dreams of breeding thoroughbreds that had been interrupted by the conflict. When the rain finally began to ease, Samuel realized he'd talked more in those few hours than he had in the past 4 years combined. Somehow, Willow's presence made it possible to remember the man he'd once been, the man who had hopes and dreams beyond mere survival. "I should go," he said, rising reluctantly. "Thank you for the coffee and the conversation." "Will you come again?" Willow asked, her direct gaze meeting his. "Perhaps when it's not raining. I'd like to hear more about those thoroughbreds you wanted to breed." Samuel hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." As he stepped out into the damp street, he felt lighter somehow, as if he'd set down a burden he'd carried for too long. The rain had stopped, and in the west, the clouds were breaking, allowing thin shafts of sunlight to pierce the gray. Over the following weeks, a cautious friendship developed between Samuel and Willow. He began stopping by the clinic regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers he'd found in the hills, a particularly fine piece of quartz from near the mines, fresh venison after a successful hunt. In return, Willow shared her medical knowledge, treating his frequent minor injuries and teaching him about the healing properties of local plants. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond the war to include their hopes, beliefs, and observations about life in Superior. Samuel found himself looking forward to these talks, planning what he might share with her during the quiet hours of his solitary work. The townsfolk noticed the change in the taciturn cowboy. He still wasn't talkative by any measure, but he no longer avoided gatherings completely. He'd nod in greeting when passing people on the street, occasionally even stopping for brief conversations. Whatever that Wilson woman's doing, it's working better than Doc Jeffrey's medicine ever did, Amos commented one evening at the saloon. You're almost human these days, Steele. Samuel merely shrugged, unwilling to examine too closely the effect Willow was having on him. To acknowledge it fully would be to acknowledge his growing feelings for her, feelings that terrified him with their intensity. In early October, a mining accident brought chaos to Superior. An explosion in the main silver mine trapped a dozen men underground, with others injured in the initial blast. Samuel was among the first responders, helping to organize the rescue effort while Willow set up a temporary field hospital near the mine entrance. For 3 days, they worked side by side, Samuel venturing into the unstable tunnels to bring out the injured, Willow treating them with unwavering focus, despite her exhaustion. They spoke little during those frantic hours, communicating instead through glances, and brief touches, her hand on his arm guiding him to place an injured miner, his steadying grip on her shoulder when she swayed from fatigue. When the last man was finally brought out alive, though barely, they stood together in the gray dawn, covered in dust and blood, watching as families reunited with their loved ones. 6 dead, 18 injured, but 8 walked away, Samuel said quietly. Better than I feared when I first saw the damage, Willow nodded, swaying slightly on her feet. The injured should recover, though Emilio may lose his leg. She closed her eyes briefly. I haven't slept in so long I can barely think. Without thinking, Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. Let me take you home. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest for just a moment. Thank you for being here, Samuel. I couldn't have done this alone. It was the first time she'd used his given name. The sound of it on her lips sent a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the rising sun. They walked in silence back to her clinic, his arm still supporting her. At her door, she turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion but still bright. We make a good team, she said softly. Samuel found himself unable to look away from her face, streaked with dirt and more beautiful to him than anything he'd ever seen. Before he could respond, she rose on tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, Samuel, she whispered, then disappeared inside, leaving him standing in the early morning light with his heart pounding like it hadn't since before the war. That night, as he lay in his cabin staring at the ceiling, Samuel was forced to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Willow Wilson. The realization terrified him. Love meant vulnerability, the possibility of devastating loss, something he'd sworn never to risk again after James died. Yet, he couldn't deny the way she made him feel alive, connected to the world again. When he was with her, the memories of war receded, and he could imagine a future beyond mere existence. The following day, he rode into the hills, seeking solitude to sort through his conflicted feelings. As liberty carried him higher into the mountains, the familiar landscape of red rocks and sparse pines offered no answers, only questions that echoed his internal struggle. Could he risk his heart again? Did he even remember how? By the time he returned to Superior 3 days later, he'd made no decisions, but the time alone had clarified one thing: avoiding Willow wasn't the answer. Whatever path lay ahead, it would have to be faced with the same courage he'd once shown on the battlefield. He found her at the clinic, tending to one of the injured miners. She looked up when he entered, and the smile that transformed her tired face sent a surge of emotion through him that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "You're back," she said simply when the miner had left. "I was concerned." "I needed to think," he replied honestly. "Being around you, it makes me feel things I thought were dead." Willow's eyes widened slightly at his candor. "Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know," Samuel admitted. "It's been safer not to feel." She approached him slowly, as one might approach a skittish horse. "Safer, perhaps, but is that really living?" "It was enough," he said. "Until you came." They stood facing each other, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Willow spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have no guarantees to offer, Samuel. Life has taught me that much. But I know that since coming to Superior, since meeting you, I feel more alive than I have since before Antietam." Samuel reached out, hesitantly touching her cheek with calloused fingers. "I don't know if I remember how to be the man I once was." "I'm not asking you to be that man," she said, leaning slightly into his touch. "We're all changed by what we've lived through. I'm asking if you're willing to discover who you might become now." The question hung between them, monumental in its simplicity. Before he could answer, the clinic door burst open and Judge Wilson entered, his face grave. "Willow, Samuel, thank goodness you're both here. There's trouble." Apache raiding party hit the Douglas Ranch at dawn. 3 dead, and they've taken the Douglas girl. The news hit like a physical blow. The Douglas Ranch lay 10 miles east of Superior, one of the most remote homesteads in the area. The family had been among the first settlers, their daughter Emma just 19 and engaged to be married in the spring. "How many raiders?" Samuel asked, his mind already calculating distances and tracking possibilities. 8, according to Jack Douglas. He was wounded but managed to ride for help. The judge looked directly at Samuel. "The Army patrol from Fort Grant won't arrive for at least 2 days. Emma doesn't have that long." "I'll go," Samuel said without hesitation. "I know those mountains better than anyone. I can track them." "I'm coming too," Willow stated firmly. Both men turned to her in surprise. "Absolutely not," the judge said. "It's too dangerous. If Samuel can find Emma, she'll need medical attention," Willow interrupted. "And I've spent time on the San Carlos reservation. I know some Apache words and customs. I might be useful in negotiations if we catch up to them before." She didn't finish the sentence. "It's no place for a woman," Samuel objected, though even as he said it, he knew it was the wrong argument to use with Willow. "Was the battlefield at Antietam a place for a woman?" she challenged. "Were the field hospitals where men screamed as I amputated their limbs places for a woman?" Her eyes flashed. "I've seen horrors you can't imagine, Samuel Steele. Don't presume to protect me now." The judge looked between them, clearly torn. "Willow has a point, Samuel. Her medical skills might mean the difference between life and death for Emma, and her knowledge of Apache customs could be valuable." Samuel wanted to argue further, but he recognized the determination in Willow's eyes. It was the same determination he'd seen as she worked tirelessly during the mine rescue. "Fine," he conceded. "But you follow my lead and do exactly as I say. No arguments." Willow nodded, already moving to gather medical supplies. "I'll be ready in 10 minutes." Within the hour, they were riding east, following the faint trail left by the raiding party. Samuel had changed into his buckskin jacket and riding boots, with a Winchester rifle in his saddle holster and a Colt revolver at his hip. Willow wore a split riding skirt and carried a small medical kit in her saddlebags, along with provisions for several days. As they rode, Samuel briefed her on what to expect. "They're heading for the Pinnell Mountains, I'd wager. Plenty of hiding places there. If we're lucky, they'll think no one's following and won't push too hard. Gives Emma a better chance of surviving the journey." "What do you know about this particular group?" Willow asked, her horse keeping pace with Liberty. "Not much," Samuel admitted. "The local bands have mostly kept to the reservation this past year. This could be renegades from further south, or young warriors trying to prove themselves. They rode hard through the day, stopping only briefly to water the horses and check the trail." Samuel was impressed with Willow's riding skill and endurance. She never complained, even as the terrain grew more challenging and the sun beat down mercilessly. As dusk approached, they found signs of the raiders' camp from the previous night, cold ashes and tracks indicating they were no more than half a day behind. "We'll rest for a few hours," Samuel decided, selecting a sheltered spot near a small spring. "No fire. We'll eat cold rations and leave before dawn." As they unsaddled the horses, Willow asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "What are Emma's chances, realistically?" Samuel paused, then gave her the truth she deserved. "If she was taken for ransom, good. If for other reasons—" He shook his head. "Apache warriors can be merciful or cruel, depending on their purpose and the band they belong to. I've known both kinds." Willow absorbed this, her expression troubled. "You've had dealings with them before. After the war, I scouted for the army briefly," he explained. "Learned their ways out of necessity. Came to respect them in many regards, though our peoples have done terrible things to each other." They settled side by side against a boulder, sharing jerky and hardtack in the gathering darkness. The night was clear, stars emerging in brilliant profusion above the desert landscape. Despite the gravity of their mission, Samuel found himself acutely aware of Willow's proximity, the faint scent of lavender that somehow lingered despite their dusty journey. "What made you leave Tennessee?" she asked suddenly. "After the war, I mean. Why come all the way out here?" Samuel was silent for a long moment, considering how much to share. Finally, he spoke, his voice low in the darkness. "When I returned home, there was nothing left. Our farm had been burned during the fighting. My mother had died of typhoid. Neighbors who'd once been friends looked at me with suspicion, a Confederate soldier returning to a Unionist area." He stared up at the stars. "And everywhere I looked, I saw James, the tree where we'd carved our names as boys, the creek where he taught me to fish. I couldn't breathe there anymore." Willow's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his own. "I understand that feeling. After losing Robert, my fiancé, Boston became a city of ghosts for me. Every street corner held a memory." They sat in companionable silence, their hands still joined, until Willow spoke again. "Do you think we ever truly heal from such losses, or do we just learn to carry them differently?" "I don't know," Samuel answered honestly. "Until recently, I would have said we just get better at numbing ourselves." He squeezed her hand gently. "Now I'm not so sure." He felt rather than saw her smile in the darkness. "That sounds like progress, Mr. Steele. It's your fault," he replied, a rare lightness in his tone. "You're very difficult to stay numb around, Miss Wilson." Her soft laughter warmed him more than any fire could have. They talked intermittently through the evening, sharing stories and observations until Willow finally drifted to sleep, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. Samuel remained awake, keeping watch and marveling at the woman beside him. In the midst of danger and uncertainty, she had awakened something in him he'd thought forever lost hope. Before dawn, they were moving again, following tracks that grew fresher as the morning progressed. By midday, Samuel estimated they were only a few hours behind the raiding party. "They've slowed down," he observed, examining fresh pony tracks. "Either they don't expect pursuit or—" He didn't finish the thought. "Or Emma is slowing them down," Willow completed grimly. "Which could mean she's injured." They pushed harder, the terrain growing more rugged as they entered the foothills of the Pinnell Mountains. Late in the afternoon, Samuel raised his hand in warning, bringing them to a halt behind a rocky outcropping. "Smoke," he whispered, pointing to a thin gray line rising from a canyon ahead. "They've made camp early. That's unusual." Cautiously, they approached on foot, leaving the horses secured behind them. At the canyon's rim, they lay side by side, surveying the scene below. 8 Apache warriors sat around a small fire. Their ponies were tethered nearby, and bundles of what appeared to be goods from the Douglas ranch were stacked beside a lean-to shelter. Of Emma Douglas, there was no immediate sign. Samuel scanned the camp carefully, finally spotting a form lying beneath a blanket in the shelter. "There," he murmured, pointing. "That must be Emma." "She's not moving," Willow observed tensely. "I need to get down there and assess her condition." "Not yet," Samuel cautioned. "We need to wait until dark. There are too many of them to approach now." As they watched, one of the warriors, clearly the leader from his bearing and the elaborate decoration on his buckskin shirt, approached the shelter. He knelt beside the still form, checking something before returning to the fire. "He's treating her injuries," Willow realized, watching intently. "Look at his movements, he's being careful with her." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's unexpected, but good news. It means they want her alive, at least for now." They retreated to a safer position to wait for nightfall, using the time to formulate a plan. Samuel's preference was to create a diversion that would draw most of the warriors away, allowing him to slip in and retrieve Emma while Willow remained hidden with the horses. "That won't work if she's badly injured," Willow argued. "She might not be able to ride. And if she needs immediate treatment—" "It's too dangerous for both of us to enter the camp," Samuel insisted. "Then we need another approach entirely," Willow said thoughtfully. "What if we tried to negotiate?" Samuel stared at her. "Negotiate? With a raiding party that just killed 3 people? You said yourself you've had dealings with the Apache before, that you respect them." Willow's expression was earnest. "What if we offered a trade, medical treatment for their injured in exchange for Emma's release?" "What makes you think they have injured?" "The early camp. The leader's careful movements, he's favoring his right side. I'd wager at least one of them was wounded in the raid." She held his gaze steadily. "It's worth trying before we resort to violence. More bloodshed won't help Emma." Samuel considered her words, reluctantly impressed by her reasoning. "It's risky, very risky." "Life is risky," she replied simply, "but I believe it's our best chance." As darkness fell, they finalized their approach. Samuel would go first, alone and unarmed except for a knife, showing peaceful intentions. He would speak in the Apache tongue he'd learned years before, offering Willow's medical skills. If the offer was rejected, they would revert to the original plan of creating a diversion. "If anything goes wrong," Samuel told her firmly, "you ride for Superior. Don't wait for me, don't try to help. Just ride." Willow's expression made it clear she had no intention of following that instruction, but she nodded anyway. Under cover of darkness, Samuel approached the camp, hands raised to show he carried no weapons. He called out in Apache as he neared the firelight, announcing himself as a healer's companion coming in peace. The reaction was immediate. Warriors surged to their feet, weapons ready, surrounding him in moments. The leader stepped forward, his face impassive in the firelight. "Why do you come to our camp, White Eyes?" he demanded in accented English. "I come to offer help," Samuel replied steadily. "My companion is a skilled healer who has treated many wounds. We know you have injured and we know you have the white woman. We propose in exchange healing for the girl." The leader studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Samuel's surprise, he laughed shortly. "You have courage to walk unarmed into our camp." He gestured to one of his men. "Show him." The warrior moved to the shelter, pulling back the blanket to reveal Emma Douglas, pale and still but breathing. Beside her lay another Apache, younger than the others, with a blood-soaked bandage around his thigh. "My brother was shot during the raid," the leader explained. "The white woman tried to run and fell from the horse, injuring her head. Neither may survive the journey to our winter camp." "My companion can help them both," Samuel said, hope rising cautiously. "She has medicines and knowledge from both white and Indian healers." The leader considered this, then nodded once. "Bring your healer. But know this: if there is treachery, you both die before the white woman." Samuel returned to Willow, explaining the situation quickly. "It's your choice," he concluded. "I won't ask you to put yourself in this danger." Willow was already gathering her medical supplies. "I took an oath to heal the sick and injured, Samuel. That includes everyone, not just those on our side. Let's go." Together they entered the Apache camp, all eyes watching their every move. The leader introduced himself as Nashota, a war chief of a small band that had broken from the reservation months before, frustrated by broken treaties and corrupt Indian agents. Willow moved first to Emma, examining her carefully. "Concussion," she reported. "Serious, but not immediately life-threatening if she's kept still." Then she turned to the wounded Apache warrior. "This is more urgent. The bullet is still inside and infection has set in." For the next hour, Samuel watched in amazement as Willow worked on the young warrior's wound, extracting the bullet and cleaning the infection with steady hands despite the tense surroundings. She spoke soothingly throughout the procedure, having Samuel translate her instructions and reassurances. When she had finished with both patients, she addressed Nashota directly. "Your brother will recover if the wound is kept clean and he rests for at least 2 weeks. The woman needs to be returned to her people for proper care." Nashota studied her thoughtfully. "You are not like other white women I have seen. And you are not like the savages the newspapers describe," Willow countered calmly. "We are all more than the stories told about us." A hint of respect showed in the war chief's eyes. "The woman may go with you when the sun rises if my brother's fever breaks by then. Until then, you will both remain as our guests." The word guests carried a clear implication that they were, in fact, prisoners, until he decided otherwise. They were given a place near the fire, under guard but treated with cautious respect. As the night deepened, Willow checked periodically on both patients, while Samuel remained alert to any change in the warrior's demeanor. During one quiet moment as they sat side by side, Willow whispered, "I'm sorry I got us into this situation. It was presumptuous to think I understood enough about their ways." "No," Samuel replied softly. "Your instinct was right. Violence would have only led to more bloodshed. This way, there's at least a chance for everyone to survive." She smiled faintly in the firelight. "When did you become the optimist between us?" "I'm learning from your example," he admitted. "Though I'll feel more optimistic when we're all safely back in Superior." Near dawn, the young warrior's fever broke, bringing visible relief to Nashota. As promised, when the sun rose, he agreed to release Emma into their care. To their surprise, he also offered them an escort to the edge of Apache territory to ensure no other bands troubled their journey. "Why this generosity?" Samuel asked as they prepared to leave. Nashota's expression remained impassive. "Your woman has strong medicine and a good heart. Such things are to be respected, even between enemies." He looked directly at Willow. My people say that to save a life creates a bond that cannot be broken. Remember this, if we meet again in different circumstances." They departed with Emma secured on Samuel's horse, while he walked alongside leading the animal carefully over the rough terrain. The Apache escort accompanied them for several miles before turning back with a wordless salute. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever been part of," Samuel commented when they were finally alone. "I'm still not sure which." Willow glanced at him, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration on her face. "Perhaps a bit of both, but it worked, Samuel. Everyone lives today who might have died." He couldn't argue with that simple truth. As they journeyed homeward, Emma drifting in and out of consciousness but stable, Samuel found himself watching Willow with new eyes. Her courage, compassion, and quick thinking had averted a tragedy. More than that, she had shown him a different way of approaching conflict, one that sought healing rather than more wounds. By the time they reached Superior, 2 days later, a bond had formed between them that went beyond their growing personal feelings. They had faced danger together and emerged not just alive, but somehow more whole than before. The town received them as heroes, especially when the full story emerged. Judge Wilson embraced his daughter with tears in his eyes, while Emma's fiancé nearly collapsed with relief at her return. Even the territorial governor sent a letter of commendation for their peaceful resolution of what could have been a bloody confrontation. In the aftermath, as life in Superior returned to its normal rhythms, Samuel found himself at a crossroads. The experience with the Apache had awakened something in him, not just his feelings for Willow, but a sense of purpose he'd lost during the war. He began to see possibilities for his future that extended beyond merely existing from day to day. One evening in late October, he rode to Willow's clinic after she had finished seeing patients. She greeted him with a smile that still made his heart race, even after all they'd been through together. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about what comes next, for me. For us, maybe, if you're interested in there being an us." Willow's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt, allowing him to continue. "I've got some land north of town. Good grazing land with a creek running through it. I've been saving my wages, thinking someday I might build something there." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to start breeding horses like I planned before the war. Good stock for ranching, maybe some thoroughbreds eventually." "That sounds wonderful, Samuel," Willow said softly. "You'd be excellent at it. There's more," he continued, finding courage in her encouraging expression. "Superior needs a proper horse doctor. Animals out here get injured, sick. Most folks just shoot them when that happens, but it doesn't have to be that way. I learned a lot about treating horses in the cavalry." Understanding dawned in Willow's eyes. "You want to be a veterinarian?" "Something like that," he acknowledged. "And I was thinking, a town that had both a horse doctor and a people doctor working together, that might be something special." Willow stepped closer to him, her eyes bright. "Are you asking me to stay in Superior, Samuel? Beyond the winter?" "I'm asking for more than that," he admitted, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking if you might consider building something here, with me. Not right away, we've both got ghosts to lay to rest first, but someday." For a moment she was silent, and Samuel feared he'd misread everything between them. Then she squeezed his hands gently. "I came to Superior looking for a new beginning," she said. "I think I've found it. Or rather found him." Her smile was radiant in the evening light. "Yes, Samuel, I'd like very much to build something here with you." Relief and joy flooded through him. Cautiously, as if she might disappear if he moved too quickly, he drew her into his arms. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home after a very long journey. The winter of 1869-1870 was one of healing and growth for both Samuel and Willow. As snow blanketed the mountains around Superior, they spent countless evenings talking, planning, and gradually learning to trust in a future together. They spoke openly of their losses, James, Robert, the lives they'd once envisioned for themselves, and in doing so, began to make peace with the past. Samuel started construction on a small ranch house on his land, working alongside carpenters from town whenever he wasn't busy with his regular duties. Willow expanded her practice, gaining the trust of even the most skeptical townsfolk with her skill and compassion. They were married in the spring, a simple ceremony in Judge Wilson's garden with the desert in bloom around them. Nashota and two of his warriors appeared unexpectedly at the edge of the property during the celebration, offering a gift of 2 fine Apache ponies before disappearing back into the hills, a gesture of respect that moved both bride and groom deeply. As the years passed, the Steele Ranch became known throughout the territory for its exceptional horses and the couple who raised them. The small house expanded to accommodate their growing family, first a son named James Wilson Steele, born in 1871, and later twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine, who arrived in 1873. Willow never gave up her medical practice, though she scaled back during the children's early years. She and Samuel worked side by side, her treating the human ailments of Superior while he tended to the 4-legged patients. They became fixtures in the community, respected not just for their skills but for their unwavering commitment to healing in all its forms. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the desert stars spread like diamonds across the sky, they would often sit together on the porch of their home, hands intertwined as they had been that first night in the wilderness. "Do you ever wonder," Willow asked once, "what might have happened if I hadn't come to Superior, if we'd never met?" Samuel considered this, looking out over the land they'd built together, the corrals where their horses grazed, the garden Willow had coaxed from the desert soil, the swing he'd hung from the cottonwood tree for the children. "I know exactly what would have happened," he said finally. "I would have continued existing but not living. My heart died at Gettysburg, Willow. You brought it back to life." She leaned against him, her copper hair now streaked with silver but still catching fire in the setting sun. "And you healed mine, Samuel. We saved each other." He pressed a kiss to her temple, marveling still at the journey that had brought them together, a wounded soldier and a grieving healer finding in each other the courage to begin again. "We did," he agreed softly. "And we continue to, every day." As night settled over the Arizona desert, the Steele family slept peacefully in their home, a sanctuary built from loss and hope, a testament to the healing power of love in the aftermath of war. For Samuel and Willow, the scars of the past would always remain, but they had learned to wear them not as wounds but as badges of survival, markers on the long road that had led them, against all odds, to each other. And in Superior, folks would tell the story for generations to come of the haunted Union veteran who'd returned from the dead, and the copper-haired healer whose touch had reminded him how to live again.